podcast is to help you break in and thrive in advertising. It's that thrive in part that I sometimes neglect to ask about, but not this episode. This episode I have on one of my favorite creatives in the industry, Dan Lucey. Dan is the Chief Creative Officer of the Havas flagship office in New York and Annex 88, overseeing all work on a multitude of brands such as Lotto.com, Lincoln Financial Group, American Cancer Society, Bank of New York Mellon, Adidas, Reckitt, NYP, Wells Fargo, and Keurig Dr. Pepper, and more. He's got such great energy, and you can honestly feel it all the way in the Havas Chicago office. That's where I work, if you didn't know. He is truly a rock star creative with a bunch of accolades, including 17 Cannes Lions, 8 D&AD pencils, 9 one-show pencils, 29 Clio statues, 3 Art Director Club cubes, and he was also awarded Business Insider's Most Creative People in Advertising right now, and Ad Age 40 Under 40, and was an Adweek Creative 100. So, the list goes beyond that, but being a good person probably matters more than all of those accolades combined. And I love how Dan opens up about his initial struggles of breaking in and getting noticed at first. Even as a CCO, he connects with junior talent and recognizes the changing advertising landscape. And you can tell he goes the extra mile for his people. I've worked with Dan and helped him produce his and Myra Nussbaum's, who's the president of Havas Chicago, their advertising podcast called Advertising Will Save Us. On that podcast, Dan and Myra speak to experts challenging the status quo on topics ranging from misinformation to climate change, racial inequality, gun violence, and so much more. They're doing fantastic work for the industry and have already addressed some important topics that need discussion. Give that a listen at advertisingwillsaveus.com. Oh, and Dan also listed out some secret resources designed just to help you break in and thrive into advertising. You can only find those on our Instagram at Breaking and Entering Pod. Now, on with the show. This is the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast, and as usual, I'm your accomplice, Gino Schellenberger. Kick it, Mikey. All right. Dan Lucey, welcome to the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast. Thanks so much for taking the time. Excited to have you on. What's been up?
Thank you for having me. You've had a lot of great guests. Honored to be included. I think it's a great podcast. You've got I love the title, Breaking and Entering. A lot of fun.
Thank you.
Good.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, really good.
Started that 130 something weeks ago, mid-pandemic. Right at the heart of it.
So you do one a week?
One a week. We haven't missed 1 week yet, and I don't plan on it.
That's discipline. That's really discipline. I think that if you want to be good at anything, you have to do it consistently. So I think the best people who do anything, I mean, kind of like talk about how they have a routine. If you're like follow any athletes, they talk about how they kind of they keep to a very rigorous routine, right? Do the same things every day, try to keep their diet the same way. And
yep.
Right. We all know Malcolm Gladwell, right? 1,000 hours and 10,000 hours and you're an expert or something like that.
Right. And I have a theory too. Like, I want to hear your take on this. Like, forced creativity kind of seems oxymoronic, but I think forcing myself to be creative with this podcast every single week just makes me stronger and better at what I do. Do you have any takes on that? Do you have like creative rituals that you do in your career that you find helpful?
Yeah. So good question. First of all, I don't think you could force creativity, but you can force yourself to sit down and work and then you'll let yourself be creative.
Sure.
I think that I think a big part about getting the most out of yourself and being disciplined is first of all, it's essential that you're disciplined, is knowing when your brain is sharpest. Like I don't love getting up early in the morning, but I know that my brain is super productive in the morning. So I'll get the most out of, I'll be the most creative then. So that's a technique I use, or kind of right at the end of the day. So the morning up until lunch, and then I think my creativity and my brain power sort of takes a nosedive into the shitter, and then it comes back to life at around 4 p.m., 4 to 7 p.m., and whenever it's needed after that. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, you got to know when you're most creative, when you're most optimal. So that's
No.
good. Where are you at right now in that? It's 1 o'clock by you.
Yeah,
So are you
this is like my dumbest.
okay?
This is
So
like my
everybody, we'll
high
note
jump
that.
point. Yeah, so like, yeah, we may have to have a redo it in an earlier hour.
Yeah,
But anyway, let's give it a go.
for sure, for sure. So back to the top though, Dan, you are the chief creative officer for Havas, New York. I don't know a lot of I never really talk about myself on this podcast, but for those who don't know, I work for Havas Chicago. So we are coworkers. I believe that's fair to say. We work together. We work together on your podcast, Advertising Will Save Us. But we're here to talk about you, what you do, your story, Havas, New York. So tell us high level about what it's like being a chief creative officer of Havas, New York.
Yeah, I thank you for having me on again. I've been a chief creative officer at Havas, New York. This is my first CCO job. I've been here almost 2 years, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think that but it's a lot of fun. And the best, I've been really fortunate to have worked for very accomplished creative directors, ECDs, CCOs, and I've picked up a few tricks along the way. And it's interesting. Something that I believe very strongly in is there's a mindset. I don't believe the people at the top. I don't think you could have the attitude that employees of the organization work for you.
Hmm.
I think this is very important. I think that the best leaders realize they work for their employees, right? And they try to facilitate an environment where people feel inspired, feel set up to win, feel like they have the right tools to really make great work, and have a good time, because we all know that our business is hard, and a lot of the fun has sort of seeped out through the pandemic and kind of and all that. We can get into that a little bit later. So
Hmm.
so I really enjoy it. I think that I'm part chief inspiration officer. That sounds a little cheesy.
Nice.
um
Chief energy officer.
chief
I said that one earlier
Oh,
today.
dude, chief energy officer. I mean, that also is maybe better for a CEO because it uses those letters, but I definitely think so. I think that this job is easier if you're somebody who has a lot of energy, which is something I think I've always had, because
Hmm.
it's you have to be there for everybody, and advertising has a fun way of surprising us, right, with the good and the bad. So you got to stay on your toes.
Absolutely. I want to ask you now, like, what's the culture like right now with Havas, New York? I know I'm pretty well versed in Chicago, but tell me about New York. Like, what are you guys feeling? Is there momentum? What's the vibe over there?
Yeah, there's a lot of momentum, and
I could tell. I could really
yeah.
tell.
Well, that's good. I think that I came on in 2 years, and we're a really good agency, and what I'm just trying to do is um, bring in ambitious people at all departments, at all levels. I think we've kind of retooled some positions. We've kind of redone our production department, brought a new head of production, brought in some different design skills that we didn't quite have. I brought in a few new ECDs, and I'm just trying to create a culture where everybody is hungry to make great work, right? We all know
Hmm.
great work is an economic multiplier. We know great work works. Um, uh, but, making work that really stands out and really unique sometimes is a little harder, right? It takes a little bit more time. It takes a little bit more. You really need the right kind of client relationships. Clients need to trust you. They need to trust that you have their best interest at heart. Um, so I'm trying to cultivate kind of a culture where everybody feels responsible for the work.
Hmm.
Everybody takes pride in the work, because advertising, here's another super corny cliche, it is a team sport, right? It really is. I think we all have a position to play. And creatives are not the only ones responsible for great work. I think that the whole thing, it starts from the moment we set up the relationship. What kind of relationship do we have? What kind of, are we sharing our ambitions with the client? Are we talking about what we each want to achieve? Do we understand what the business problem is, right to the brief, right? Is are
Hmm.
we finding new and interesting spaces to push a brand, right down to the execution and right down to the work, and that's the creative. So I really want everybody to take pride and feel like it's their job to make great work.
and it's working. You guys just had a pretty new business win. You want to talk about Lotto?
Yeah, Lotto's super exciting. It's lotto.com. Super fun client. We just launched it about a month ago. They're in 4 states right now, and they're about to expand. So this is something that we think is going to be an ongoing client with a lot of creative potential. They let us have some fun. I don't know if you sounds like you saw the work, but it's super colorful. I love how I love the branding we set up. I love the look we gave them. Welcome to Whenever. It's just sort of a really fun kind of platform to play on. And there's going to be a lot of work coming out under that platform. Super excited to be working with them.
Perfect. Love it. And I know I just really love the sports references. We don't get a lot on this show, so I really appreciate that.
We'll only give you sports references from here on out.
Heck yeah. Love it.
I'll try to stick with that.
Well, I want to go back now and look at like your career. You've had a pretty rock star career at some really good agencies, your good roster lineup, whatever you want to call it. Throw us back to that day. Do you remember when you decided, hey, this is what I want to do? I want to be in advertising.
So for as long as I could remember, I wanted to I thought I was going to be like a guitarist in a band, like a
That'd be cool.
professional musician. I cut the sleeves off a denim jacket that I was given when I think I was like 5 years old. I was left in front of the TV and MTV was on, and it just kind of struck me. And everybody was rocking the denim vests, and I was like, "Dude, I'm like, this sleeves are for losers. I need to have a vest." So I went and got some scissors and butchered the shit out of this brand new denim jacket. In a lot of trouble, but that was maybe I was 5 or 6 years old. But right from that moment on, I was hooked. So I played guitar. Played a lot of in a lot of bands. Definitely thought I was going to do that, but the truth about me is I had a lot of interests. Right, I wasn't ever just one thing. So even though I liked music and played in bands, I also played sports. Right, I also was curious about other things. I drew a lot. I was into art. I was into movies. I was into writing. So I kind of had a lot of interests. Heading into high school, I knew I had to. My best chance of getting into a halfway decent college was through a portfolio. So I created a portfolio and I went to art school, but I didn't know I wanted to be in advertising, but I knew that I didn't want to be. I had this kind of image in my mind of this kind of like starving painter type, who just had this burning desire to just like express themselves at all costs, no matter if they were just in deep poverty. I didn't think I had that needed to get out. I kind of wanted I wanted a job. I knew I wanted to be creative, and I knew I wanted to do art, but I also knew that I kind of wanted a steady paycheck at some point. So I was kind of, so right then and there, that kind of, I think, set the conditions for me to get into advertising. The fact that I had multiple interests, I wanted to be creative, but I also wanted a paycheck, So I went to Syracuse University, and they had tried a few different things, but advertising was one of the courses you could major in. I took some ad classes, ad classes, and I did take some ad house classes. More on that later. Took some ad classes, and I really liked it. I loved coming up with concepts. I loved solving problems through creativity, and so it kind of went from there. I finished my 4-year degree at Syracuse University with an advertising portfolio that I thought was pretty good. I graduated and then didn't get a job because it actually wasn't very good. This was 1999, and it might have been good compared with the people I graduated with.
Yeah.
But this was 1999, and ad schools, you've probably heard this on your podcast, were all the rage, right? So I don't know how a woman named Lauren Slaff got in touch with me. She ran a course called Ad House. I kind of mentioned that a minute ago. And she kind of said, "Hey, your book's okay. You have potential, but you're never going to get a job with it. You need to take these classes." So I signed up for her classes, and Ad House still exists, by the way. Everybody should check it out. Ad House NYC, I think. I'm sure you could take them remotely if you don't live in New York City, but it's a great program. It's run by creative directors.
Yeah.
and it's like a, I forget what it is, like 6 weeks. I've actually taught there myself in the past, about 5, 6 years ago.
Oh, nice.
And it's run by creative directors in agencies, and you show up and there's a class usually around 10, 12 kids. Sometimes it's people who are in the industry and they want to get their book better. Sometimes it's
Yep.
people who are in other careers and they're thinking about getting into advertising. But anyway, and they give you assignments and you get real feedback. And it was a lot of fun and it encouraged me even more. And then I got an opportunity to get an internship at a place called Mad Dogs and Englishmen.
What is that?
So that was a small creative shop that was super popular in the late 90s, early 2000s.
In New York?
In New York, they had a crazy reputation for being really edgy, really irreverent,
Okay.
really funny.
What was some of the work or some of the clients?
Village Voice, Movie Phone. Do you remember Movie Phone? Do you know what that is?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna blow your mind with this. This was like a huge business. There was a phone number you would call and they would tell you where the movies. If you're googling it right now, you're gonna laugh. They tell you what movies are playing. This is like pre-internet, right?
Oh,
So
heck
it's like,
yeah.
could you imagine calling? It was like on Seinfeld. Could you imagine calling up, being like, because like, what is playing and where? It was a service dedicated to that. That's what it was.
Nice.
Google was like not really a thing yet.
Right.
So that was a super fun client. But anyway, it was this great place. They gave me my first internship, and they eventually hired me on. So, and that kind of, to be honest with you, shaped how I see work.
So let's back it up here. I want to let's go over what we learned. We know that you went to Syracuse. You thought you had a great portfolio. It turns out you didn't. So did you like get rejected, or did you just kind of look at the work that was out there already? What made you say, besides that girl recruiting you to go to her ad house, what was that realization that your portfolio maybe wasn't that great?
The fact that I didn't have a job, and it was like, I had this expectation that I would have a job right before I graduated or
Yeah.
immediately after. Right. I think that, which is not really the case, but no one talks about that, or at least no one was talking about that with me. So when I was sitting, um, when I was living in my parents' basement,
Mm-hmm.
at like 21 years of age with like
Yeah.
no job, and my parents are at work and my brothers are either at college or they have jobs and my older brother was living in the city at the time, New York City. And I'm sitting on Long Island in the basement. It's quiet. It's quiet as fuck, and
Mm-hmm.
you just kind of sit there and you're like, "Ugh, this is like sad,"
Yeah.
I would so that was a hint that I needed to get a better book when it was mid-July, and I reached out to a few people and I got kind of a, hey, yeah, it's pretty good, keep going, whatever. Got some feedback on my book, not job offers, and I realized, oh my God, I gotta fix this. So
Right.
then, yeah, so that's why I went to Ed House. So building on that, when I went to Ad House, they showed us books from the portfolio schools at the time, which were there wasn't a Miami ad school. It was a Portfolio Center and Creative Circus.
Yep.
And I looked at those books, and that was another realization. I needed to work a little bit harder because those books were fucking great,
Yeah.
and mine was shit compared to them.
Yeah. And that still holds true today. Like looking at the industry standard portfolios, whether it's your VCUs now, whatever, whoever, you tell me. You're the CCO here. Like I know Circus is shutting down, like Miami ad schools. I don't know, maybe that's a good, or definitely CA annuals. What should they do for reference points to see like where do I stack up with my portfolio at the moment?
That's a really good question. I think they should definitely be. I think students should go to other schools' portfolio reviews, walk around, look at books. I don't know if that's a thing, if they're allowed
They're
in and
probably
out.
all virtual right now, but
They're probably all, but students should look. I mean,
yeah, just say you're a recruiter at
yeah,
random agency and just figure out, like break in.
it's really helpful. There's this thing you do at art school, where if you're all drawing the same figure drawing or still life, the professor makes you take a pause and you walk around and look at other people's work, and you learn so much from that. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's super helpful for anybody who's trying to, work on their portfolio, to not just to somehow find out what other people are doing, because you really can see where the bar is, and you can kind of, you're either hitting it, exceeding it, or you have some work to do. Yeah.
Did your BFA, how did, I didn't ask about this, but did your BFA, because you're one of the few guests that I think I've interviewed that have a BFA.
Really?
I believe so. I could be wrong on that,
Where?
but how did that influence like your portfolio? How does that influence your career today? Do you recommend that route for people to transfer out or transfer in? What do you How does that influence or shape your career?
So I had a BFA, and but really I had a major in advertising. So I graduated with a portfolio. I took some foundational classes. I think creatives, the best creatives these days, have to be able to write and understand art direction. They don't
Yep.
have to, like, if you're not. I think the best creatives, if I'm going to be, I think myself, I was always sort of a writer slash art director, right? I could write and I could art direct. I think that's super helpful, especially when you become a creative director, because you understand both elements and how important they are together. So I think that people who are purely one or the other, I think the higher you climb in organizations, the less opportunity there is to have a partner who complements you in that way,
Right.
right?
Right.
I mean, not all organizations, but
Yeah.
most, I would say, these days. So I think that to understand both, and I know a lot of copywriters who don't understand Photoshop, they don't know Illustrator, they don't know how to design, but they know when shit looks like, when things look bad, right?
Sure.
They could point it
You have
out,
the
and they could
eye.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can understand hierarchy, or they understand how brands are supposed to look, and I think that's really really helpful. And I know, and art directors who understand, what, have an ear for good writing, can understand good writing, can write dialogue if you're doing film, or just sort of understand how language can kind of elevate something. I think that's also really important.
Yeah, you
Oh,
definitely have to the understanding, but maybe not in the beginning where you can execute perhaps, but you definitely have that eye as you're starting out.
yeah, I think so. I think so. So I think the best creatives are people who can kind of understand and appreciate both sides
Hmm.
of it. So if you have a BFA, lean into it. This, I think, was your question. Lean into
Hmm.
it. Know that it's a critical part, right, of the equation, and try to learn about the writing. And if you're a writer, and writing is where you're comfortable, again, reach across the aisle to your art director friends, partners, and understand good art direction. Keep a Pinterest board of good design, good animation, good type. I think that could be something that could be incredibly beneficial.
I agree. I agree. You think it's harder to break in today? There's a lot
Um,
more mediums now.
yeah, it's interesting. It's a really good question. I don't know if it's harder to. It's always been hard to break in, right? We can go into further detail about how hard it was for me. I mean, I had a internship. I worked unpaid for 3 months, then paid very little, and then paid a bit
Already.
more, and then whatever. And we can go back to that. So
Yeah.
so it was even hard back then. And I think if I look back at my class, I would say, and I have to note, the Syracuse program now is
It's
a lot
baller.
is a lot better
Yeah,
than
it's a
it
top
was
it's a
when I
top
was
one.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah, when I was there. But and
it's a
I'm
great
I'm
program.
involved in that program. I agree. I'm impressed with the students coming out of it. Um, but yeah, I don't know if it's hard. It's always harder to break in, right? I think that out of the 50 or 45 or so kids that graduated from the advertising program that I went to at Syracuse, I would say only 4 of us are working. 5 of us in my year, which is
At an agent, at an agency, at an
yeah,
agency.
at an agency.
Yeah,
I'd say about 4 or 5 of us, and I would say in the class below me, I would think that number might be a little higher, but it's under
sure.
10. So that's less than 25%. That's less than 20% of kids graduating with a degree are actually working
Yeah,
in that field, which is crazy. So it's always been hard to break in. I
yeah.
don't know if it's any easier now. But what I can tell you is I think that it's harder to be a junior now. I do think that's something that we should talk about. I do
Okay.
think
I neglect this on this show. The show's breaking and entering, but it's supposed to be how to break in and thrive in it. I always neglect the thrive in part. So I would appreciate if we can hover here and say, okay, you broke in, but now like how do you do well in it?
you've
I always skip that.
you've entered. You've
Yeah,
entered. You've clearly entered.
yeah.
What now? Um, there's the industry every year we're asked to do more and more, right? For a client, there's more and more channels you could execute in. It's the business is getting more complex. Timelines are getting crunched. Budgets are getting crunched,
Yeah.
right? So it seems like we're doing more work in less time.
Yep.
Now, that is not a condition to really benefit a junior, because a junior is, I would say, most juniors have raw potential and they have some basic skills, but when they first enter the business, they're not immediately useful, and that's okay. And I would think that that would be across all different industries, people just entering the business. You have to have some patience. You have to kind of understand that there's going to be a learning curve, and you have to be patient with people. And I think the tendency in our business is you could end up, having clients, again, the industry is moving faster, asking to do more with less, and juniors are kind of thrown on into that kind of mix, and it's hard for them to keep up. And I think that you could have the very best intentions to kind of mentor this junior person and make sure that you're setting them up to succeed, but quickly, if you're under pressure and you're trying to make a deadline, and you're giving them work and they're not delivering, you're sort of like, well, I don't even have time to go over why this is wrong with this person and sit down and work with them, because I need to move, right?
Right.
I need to hit my
Done.
deadline.
Yeah.
And I think what ends up happening is there, and I've seen this at a couple different agencies, creative directors could, again, not on purpose, but just not take the juniors on under their wing as much, right? Because they just don't have time. So then when they get another brief and the creative manager says, "Hey, you're going to stick your teams on it," and then I think you should stick this junior team on, they go, "I don't have time for that junior team right now."
Hmm.
Right? I just they're going to slow me down, and I think we're moving so fast. So I think it's a real problem. Something that I started at Havas, New York, is a program called Charlie, named after Charles Havas, who was a young entrepreneur, where we have ACDs and below, right, to the people just getting into the business, meet bi-monthly, or monthly, and talk about everything, what they're struggling with, right? We create a community so they could ask each other, they could learn from each other. And there's also an ECD team, Marcelo and Barth, who I have kind of facilitate these conversations. They mentor these kids, and it's time outside of working hours to really kind of break down what they're struggling with, what they can improve on, share tips and tricks, get up to speed with different things in the industry, get inspired by different work. I even drop briefs in there that they
Oh,
could work on as a group.
nice.
We dropped a brief last year in there for the LA Forney Center,
Yep.
which is the Center for LGBTQ homeless youth. Really, really important organization. And the Charlie Group created some amazing work. It ended up winning a bunch of awards, won a whole bunch of Clios, won a whole bunch of things. So, and it was
And
really
so it was
beautiful
from that young group.
from that
That's where
young
it
group.
started.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I think without that Charlie program, I think people get lost, especially, and look, I'm all for the hybrid work environment. I think that it gives people some needed flexibility.
Hmm.
But I think if you're younger, I think it's that much easier to get lost, right?
Yeah,
If you're not in someone's face.
I can't do it. I can't. I show up to work every day, not saying that people listening, you need to do this. It's just for my own mental health, but also just being like bouncing around, going into conference rooms. Like if anybody needs my help, I'm there. I get that take. I definitely think to stand out and to get better, showing up definitely helps. But that hybrid is, I think it's necessary for people. I think
Yeah,
you have to have that.
you have to have that. Yeah, you have to. Yeah, you have to. Again, you have to be in front of people, right? A lot. I hate to say that, but out of sight, out of mind, right? Especially if you're kind of trying to raise your hand for stuff, and you just kind of, if your only point of contact as like the kind of the lowest person in an organization, your only point of contact is maybe your creative manager, or maybe a ACD team or a CD team,
You can't.
and your partner, and maybe an account team. You
Yeah.
don't really have exposure to the whole. You don't even know what's going on in the organization.
You gotta get involved, and like that Charlie program is the perfect way just to get started. I'm gonna start that in Chicago.
Yeah,
That's really
do it.
smart.
We would
I'm
love
gonna
that.
do.
We'll give you the
Do you
whole.
just put it in your Slack channels, or like do you have like just a bi-weekly meeting set up?
Yeah,
What does that
yeah.
look like?
So I could I'm happy to send you the program, and all
Perfect.
the assets and stuff, and we got a cool logo and everything, which is
Oh, heck yeah.
which is important, right? Good branding.
Nice.
Yeah.
I
So
like it.
I think that's important.
Yeah, you gotta stay visible. You gotta raise your hand. Anytime there's like extracurriculars, like a lot of my job is putting on these kind of like extracurriculars, I like to call it, when they're actually super important for the agency. But if you ever like know who that person is at the agency, like your comms director, or if you have an event planner, let's say, like stay close with them, because then they'll use you. You'll be working with like high ups on an executive level to get these events and programs initiatives put together, and that's super helpful too.
Yeah, super important.
Love it. Any other advice like about like thriving in advertising for the long term? Because you've done this for a long time. I know we only hinted upon like your break-in story, but I want to go over also just like high level. So from there, you went the art director route, and you were at Mad Dogs and Englishman,
Yeah.
and you were there for about 2.5 years.
Yes.
In turn, turned into an art director.
Correct.
Love it. And then you kind of like went to some other great agencies. I don't know what DeMassimo Goldstein is, to be honest, but
So DeMossimo Goldstein was a small agency similar to Mad Dogs Englishman.
okay,
They were in the East Village on Astor Place, and they had some super fun clients. We had Hard Rock in Las Vegas when that first opened.
nice.
We had Crunch Gym was a client that Mad Dogs and Englishman had. I kind of went there um, because I loved what you know. I love the Mad Dogs vibe. I love that as a young creative, the smaller agency was a good fit for me because I got real briefs,
Heck yeah.
right?
Yeah,
I got real opportunities. I wasn't, part of a 50, 100 person creative department team. I was part of a team of 8 people.
that's interesting. It's a
So,
recurring topic on this
yeah.
show about like small versus large where you're starting off, but as long as you have good clients and good people and good briefs that are coming your way early on, that's the best case scenario. It's
Yeah.
not always like that. You don't get to choose all the time. Most of the time, you don't really get to choose your first couple jobs. So the fact that you had that early on where you're getting real briefs under your belt, build your portfolio up, super strong foundation, which kind of set you up to go to Saatchi
Yeah.
and Good B and BBDO and Joan and now Havas today. So like some powerhouse agencies. Your work I want to talk about. Uh the Tide Stick Super Bowl ad,
Yeah.
hilarious. I When I saw that you were a part of that, I was cracking up. I love that ad. It's one of my favorite Super Bowl ones. I want to talk about that for
Oh
sure.
yeah. Sure.
Where was
I
that at? Was that Saatchi?
Yeah, that was Saatchi. So that might have been the first big break I had. So here, okay, if we're talking to people who are breaking and entering, so once you've entered, you've got to
Hmm.
be patient. And I think that's hard for anybody, especially people who are ambitious and they feel like they could do the job. It took me I don't know, I want to say like 8 years, 7 years to before I kind of hit it with something that was highly visible, that was that I felt super good about. And
Wow.
I was close so many other times in my career. So that was at Saatchi and Saatchi. We did that work. I worked, my creative directors at Saatchi and Saatchi were Jan and Leo, who run JL right now, Johannes Leonardo.
Oh, cool.
Okay. So they were my creative directors. And we got a brief and they wanted to talk to a little bit of a younger audience. And they a whole bunch of teams did some work, and me and my partner did this stain stick, talking stain spot. I think Jan and Leo might have done the other spot or through a team, whatever. And so we
Mhm.
went and shot 2 spots, and the clients saw ours and really liked it. And from there, they started running it. And it got a positive response. I think they played it at a P&G meeting, and
Internal.
it like internal, but I think it
Hmm.
was like a big like kind of like showcase thing.
Yeah.
And they were like, "We love this. Let's put it on the Super Bowl." So I
Oh,
remember
heck yeah.
I remember getting that call, and it was
So
I was like, "Fuck yeah."
it wasn't even a Super Bowl brief. It was just like it was
It
just a normal
wasn't.
brief.
No, normal brief. It happened organically,
Wow.
and the organization believed in it, and that's why they stuck it on there. And I was
And
I was really
Let's talk
grateful.
about. I want to talk about is like this guy at a job interview, kind of breaking into whatever. We don't know what he's interviewing for. I don't think you can't really tell what he's saying because he has a stain that's literally talking on his dress shirt, and it's in front of the interviewer, and it's just drowning out whatever he's saying. And the line at the end is silence the stain instantly. So
Yes.
it's really smart. It's hilarious.
Um, yeah, someone else pointed out once, I think it was my brother-in-law, who said his favorite line in the spot was the asterisk, the legal that said coffee stain depicted. Obviously it's kind of right, it was the stain was alive. So
Love it.
but legal, right? That was it. But yeah, we thought there was a look, any good work, the best work starts with a good insight. If you have a stain on your shirt, you don't make
So
a good impression. You look kind of like a slob, and it's distracting, and people make all sorts of inferences about who you are, what your lifestyle is, and you're not going to be successful.
it makes it look so easy. Like advertising should be so easy after like looking at that. You could tell the insight, you could see this clever, simple execution, but I'm sure there's so much work that went into that, or it was like difficult to sell.
Yeah, there was a lot of work that went into it. I think that insight is always super important. I think execution is always super important,
Yeah,
right? We tried out
yeah,
a lot of different gibberish over that stain, and
yeah.
our director was Swedish, and he had a buddy who was like, because we were like doing gibberish over it, and he's like, let my friend do it. It could be funny with a Swedish accent.
Yeah,
And it was just like, yep, that's it, done. You know what I mean? It was like,
yeah,
yep, done.
yeah,
That works. So yeah, it's again execution. Everybody is important throughout the process,
yep.
right up to the very last minute. But
I love it.
I want to go back to the patience part,
Hmm.
because I thought I was gonna have like my big break way earlier when I was working at Mad Dogs and Englishmen. There was an assignment. Again, we talked about movie phone a little bit, and that was the best brief in the agency, and it came around once a year. And every team wanted to produce movie phone work because they were making just these great films. They were like fake movie trailers, right? And it was the thing you look forward to all year long. And me and my partner at the time were at Mad Dogs for 2 years, and we were really ambitious, and we kind of made a pact with each other that we were going to sell the work this year,
Oh heck
right?
yeah.
So we kind of like got all like amped up to do it, and we ended up um presenting all the work. I think that went to the meeting was ours, right? So we like kind of really killed ourselves to just make sure that we had everything in the meeting, and just to try to ensure that we were going to make something. Because if we made these spots and we put them on our reel, like that would have been our big break, right? We would
Hmm.
have been juniors with high profile film on our reel, and at the time that was the best you could have hoped for. Most people at our level, 1 or 2
Sure.
years into the business, didn't even get these kind of like what we call them TV briefs at the time, right? So we were super excited. We sold what I thought was a super funny spot in. We engaged the director at the time, a very famous director. So it's like everything is like lining up, right? This is what I'm waiting for.
Right.
Um, I think this was September 9th, 2001.
Uh-oh.
September 8th. A couple days later, September 11th
Hmm.
happened, put the whole thing on pause. AOL bought the company Movie Phone at the time. The new CMO of AOL kills our spots, throws it back out there. Another team throws some work in, sells some work. They make that work. They fire us as an agency.
Oh my goodness.
It was 70% of our revenue because we were like right at the kind of like the beginning of the dot-com bust. I don't know if people remember that, but in 2001, there was a huge, 2002, there's a huge recession. All these kind of dot-coms went out of business, and they
Hmm.
were the ones fueling a big part of these smaller advertising agencies. And then I get laid off.
Oh my gosh.
And then I got laid off. So in December. So it's like, so I went from like thinking I was going to really make it to not having a job. And I think that taught me a lot. It was really painful at the time, but it taught me to be patient. And then 5 years later, I did the talking stain thing. So, I mean, there was countless things I made in between, and
Yeah.
could have been, should have been, all those things. But you have to be a little bit delusionally optimistic Again, we're talking about entering. So be
Mhm.
patient, be also delusionally optimistic, because you got to wake up every day thinking something can happen, something good
Yeah.
can happen. And if you don't, you're it's a tough business.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a business of rejection later on too. You get rejected a lot, some of your ideas, it seems like.
All the time.
Yeah.
There's 1,000 ways, and this is gonna be depressing for people listening. There are thousands of ways your idea can die. It's so much of it is out of your control. Yeah.
Mhm.
Be patient.
Absolutely. You
Be
have to be.
optimistic.
And yeah, what else there's no other option. You have to be optimistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's life.
Optimistic.
And
Yeah.
you do a good job of that too, being optimistic about the industry in general. And I think one way you exemplify that is through your latest podcast, Advertising Will Save Us. So I've had the pleasure of helping you guys with that. You and Myra Nussbaum, President and Chief Creative Officer here in Chicago, and you obviously being the co-host in New York. Great podcast. You want to talk about that high level, what you guys are up to with that, where they can find that, because it's been such a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you for the plug. Yeah, Advertising Will Save Us. I think you could find it wherever you listen to your podcast,
Mhm.
Spotify or on Apple Podcast app. It's or go to our website. It's yeah, advertising. I think Myra and I, so we, Havas is all about making meaningful ideas, right? Creating these kind of meaningful ideas that really kind of connect with our audience, wherever possible, make the world sort of a better place. I mean, it doesn't mean everything is for social good, but we're a B Corp here in New York, right? Which is
Yep.
something that we think is really important. We have to be aware of everything we do. We have to be aware of the kind of clients we take on, the waste, that we're encouraging, just all these sorts of things that you have to be aware of in 2022,
Which everybody should be.
which everybody
Absolutely.
should be.
And you guys are doing that.
Look, we still do our fair share of like ads that have nothing to do with cause and purpose, and we always
Mhm.
will. But I think that we kind of talk a little bit about, we want to be one of the best agencies in the world, but we also want to be one of the best agencies for the world. And I think we're not the only ones doing this, right? I think that agencies have had a history of creating work that have led to real change. And, there's some interesting tension that everybody kind of hears advertising and they only think of the bad,
Mhm.
right? Consumerism, waste, kind of making people feel less than, playing on people's insecurities, all those
Mhm.
things. But actually, in reality, we're doing a lot of good, and we don't really get credit for that good that we're doing. And there's an opportunity to talk about that. There's an opportunity to bring on CMOs and agency folk to talk about projects or ambitions they have. We've had some good guests on, and I really feel quite fortunate to be part of this podcast. But yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Amazing. Yeah. I definitely need some, advertising can have a bad light. There's some negative naysayers out there about it, but you guys welcome them to submit their comments, and you guys will address that in the beginning of each episode. Or
Yeah, that was super important to us that we weren't. Look, I don't want to ever be preachy. You know what I mean? I think that we have to own up to most of the advertising is probably not helpful.
yeah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean? And
or good.
or good. And some of the things we've done in the past, I think as an industry, is bad. We have
Absolutely.
to own up to that, right? We haven't
Sure.
always
So,
done the right thing or the good thing or the interesting thing. So I think kind of owning that up
yeah.
front.
And pushing people now to
Yeah,
address it, and pushing it to like, all right, what do we need to do next? And I think you guys do a great job of that.
yeah. So yeah, I love. Yeah, again, I love the people in our business. I love what they stand for, and kind of the change they want to see, both on in the work they make and sort of the cultures they want to be a part of. And I think that's great.
I love it. How can people reach out to you, Dan, if they want to connect with you, reach out to you, get any advice? What are you thinking?
Hit me on LinkedIn. I
Yep.
feel like that's probably the best way.
Leave a note for
Le-
sure.
leave a note, and
People don't do that. It's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, and I will try to get back to you. I do. Again, I've taught advertising classes. I'm involved in the program at Syracuse. I do like to help people get into this industry or break in and enter. So happy to help anybody out there who's looking for it.
Perfect. And that's why you've been a great guest. Thank you again, Dan.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you so much for listening to this entire episode of the Breaking and Entering Advertising podcast. If you like what you heard, it would mean a lot to us and help us grow and get better guests and better break-ins if you can go to Apple Podcasts and leave us 5 stars and a small review if you have the time. Be sure to connect with our guests if you like what they said by going to our Instagram at Breaking and Entering Pod. That's all one word, Breaking and Entering Pod on Instagram. We have links to their portfolios and their LinkedIn, and they want to connect, so do that. And thank yous. Thank you to Mikey Malarkey, our audio engineer, and Buchan Zhang, our creative director. Can't do it without you two, and a team from the University of Illinois. It's a student team from the agency called AdBuzz. They're a PR agency, and it's been a pleasure working with them. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next week with another amazing guest.